Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, I'm John, this is Many a TrueNet, and welcome to a quick first impressions of Thrones of Britannia, the new Total War thing, because I've got to play it, which is very exciting, and now I finally get to tell you about it. I was actually there, the very first day they showed it to the public. Creative Assembly let me come to their house and actually have a little play in it, which is very, very cool indeed. Now, I can't actually show you footage. I myself have recorded. I wasn't able to do that. But what I do have is a bunch of screenshots, a bunch of video that Creative Assembly has actually sent me, and I'm allowed to tell you like everything that I was able to figure out from playing the game for a few hours, and also speaking to devs and going over the additional footage they sent me with a fine-tooth comb right now. So, I think we should be able to figure out an awful lot. Short version is it looks really, really damn cool. So first up, what is Thrones of Britannia, a Total War Saga? Just in case you haven't been paying attention so far, basically it's a new historical Total War game. And the first of the Total War Saga games, which are basically just like Total War standalones, focused around like small, particularly interesting, pivotal moments in history, which I don't think anyone's going to particularly object to, because that's pretty much exactly what Fall of the Samurai was to Shogun 2, and everyone bloody loves Fall of the Samurai. Like, whenever I ask people, like, which is their favourite Total War game, Fall of the Samurai comes up a lot, so I imagine people are going to be pretty happy with that sort of approach. And as you probably guessed from the title, it's set in Britain in the late 9th century. We're going to have ourselves 10 factions, 8 fairly traditional Total War things. 2 of them were described to me as Sea Raider factions. I didn't get to see those in action, so don't necessarily know exactly what those guys are going to be involving, but they sound kind of hilarious. What I do know about the factions, however, is broadly like how some of them are going to shake out, because the dev was willing to talk to me about that. So for example, we know like the English factions, they're going to be good all-rounders. The Celtic faction is going to be better at like skirmishing and range and what have you, and the Viking factions are going to have the elite infantry, but terrible cavalry. So how does the campaign work? Well, I'll put the actual map they've already released on screen right now. Basically, it works the way I like it to work, which is rather than starting off with a big empire and having to manage that like you did in Medieval 2 Total War Kingdoms, which I believe was the last time, in fact the only time other than this, we've had a British specific campaign. Instead, it's basically 100 little mini factions, which has kind of been in fashion in Total War recently, because that's how it was in Warhammer and Warhammer 2, which I very much approve of, because it means basically everyone starts off with maybe like one province, maybe 1 or 2 provinces. So you get to start small and build up your empire from scratch, which has always been the sort of Total War I prefer. It's generally been like how it's been most of the time, like it's how all the Warhammers were. Like for example, Attila and Empire are 2 where you actually started off with bigger empires rather than having to build from scratch. In general, you do actually build from scratch, and I have always preferred it that way. And as for how your actual empire works, the province system that's kind of been in vogue ever since Rome 2 is back, but it's had a couple of rather interesting changes to it. So you still have all your territory divided into provinces, where there is one capital and several sub-regions. But the sub-regions have been relegated from what you might expect from Warhammer or Attila, say. They're not little towns anymore. You don't get to like have building slots in them and upgrade them as you wish. Instead, now the actual sub-regions have fixed resources that can be upgraded. So let me give you an example. You might find, say, a little sub-region in your territory is where, say, a mine is, and that's just where your mining income comes from. And all that exists in that little region is just the mine. If you do an upgrade there, you make your mines better, but you can't choose to, say, demolish that and build something else in its place. That's just where your mines are. And here's the big change for that arrangement. These little sub-regions do not have garrisons and cannot be upgraded to have walls. Up to this point, you've always been able to put walls and better garrisons in your sub-regions if you wanted to. So, for example, I think if I recall correctly, in Attila, if you got a sub-region up to level 3, it automatically gained some walls, and it always had a little bit of garrison by default. And in Warhammer 2, meanwhile, if you actually upgraded your defences up to level 3 in your sub-regions, not only did they get walls, they actually had quite a decent standing army present, so you could really keep the entirety of your empire well locked down. That's all gone at this point. So no garrisons, no walls for your sub-regions. That's also particularly dangerous because the sub-regions can be making a lot of money for your territory, because the most important unique resources, mines producing mining income, metal that's allowing for metalworking and all sorts of important things like that, your port, where your food comes from, because food's back in the game like it was, say, in Rome 2 and Attila, and is still very, very important. Basically, incredibly important resources are not necessarily going to actually be located inside the provincial capital. There might be really important stuff located outside of it, where it is relatively vulnerable. There's nothing to stop you, of course, actually building up an army and sending it over to actually guard over a particular resource or sub-region. If you want to guard it, you can still actually garrison troops in there if that's something that you want to do. And I was told when I actually asked after this, if you do decide to put an army in there and a fight does break out over that resource, the sub-region will appear on the map in some capacity, so might still be useful in some ways during the battle. Not 100% sure on that, wasn't able to actually see a battle like that occurring myself. But rather than actually trying to guard each individual one, which you'll never have enough armies to do, because yeah, plenty of provinces could have like as many as 4 sub-regions each on top of their actual capital. Probably it's more important to be focusing on diplomacy and just making sure that you're friends with all the guys around you. If you haven't been playing Total War recently, that probably sounds terrifying, because back in the days of old Total War, yeah, you couldn't really rely on anyone. Anyone would basically sooner or later backstab you and you'd backstab everyone else. No, actually, if you've been playing Warhammer 2, I think actually Creative Assembly have got much better at making people be reliable, and actually they did specifically flag they wanted the AI to be a little bit more reliable these days, and I did find that that was true in the recent Total War games. Like, if you have an alliance with someone and if they like you, they do genuinely not attack you. In fact, I don't think I was actually betrayed or backstabbed by anyone I had a close relationship with in the entirety of my Skaven Warhammer 2 playthrough. So diplomacy is a lot more important, and it actually is easier to make friends, because people have like ethnic or cultural identities. Like, for example, the Celtic factions tend to actually hang out together and like each other and have diplomatic bonuses with each other. So they tend to actually group together. So, for example, the faction I actually got to play as while I was at Creative Assembly was one of the Irish factions, and I found it pretty easy to make fast friends and alliances with the other Celtic factions around me. Plus, of course, it's a double-edged sword. Yes, in theory, an enemy can sweep in and take away some very important resources from you without much of a fight, but the enemy's resources are just as vulnerable to attacks from you. It just makes it a much faster and more fluid game, which I actually really approve of as a change, because what I kind of found after I played Warhammer 2 for a while is you kind of got bored when you were taking over sub-regions of having to fight the same garrison troops over and over and over again, which meant I ended up just auto-resolving under all circumstances. And it's not like a basic garrison was going to stand in the way of a full stack army I was sending to capture a sub-region anyway, so it didn't make any difference, so you may as well just get rid of the garrisons, to be honest. So yeah, I think it just kind of streamlines things a little bit. There's also been big changes in the Provincial capital system, by the way, because this game is built in the Attila engine. They've made a really big change there, which is like, up to this point, pretty much in, I think, just about every Total War game ever, like a capital, whether it was back in the days before provinces or even into the Provincial system, there was always like a central government building that you upgraded. Or sometimes it wasn't a building, sometimes it was just a description of the size of the town. So like, you know, in Attila, you would upgrade your town to a city, and then a city to a big city. I can't remember what the big city was called. And the same thing happened in Warhammer and Warhammer 2, and back in the old days in diddly diddly dee. You know, the old classic Rome, village into town, into city, into large city, into huge city. That business. That has gone. Now, there is a capital building, but it is variable. Like, loads of provinces are really unique, because the capital building that defines what stage the capital is at, and when you upgrade to this central building, it unlocks a new building slot in the city, just like in Rome 2 or Attila. That is now variable, and much of it's variable for every single province, but it was variable for all the ones I saw. Like, for this faction I played as, Mead, in the middle of Ireland, their central building that was like the big building at the centre of the provincial capital was a church. So if I wanted to actually grow my city and unlock a new development slot where I could build something new inside that city, I needed to upgrade my church from one level up to another. But that's definitely not true for everyone, because for example, I'll put some footage on screen right now from the footage that Creative Assembly actually showed me, where you can briefly see that the actual central building in a different province's capital appears to be some form of port. Now again, I really flipping like this change, because it means that every province is actually good for its own unique, interesting reason. You won't just end up with clone cities across your empire where you're building the same things over and over again. But instead, now, one province might specialise in a church, which basically seems to mostly be for causing happiness, so one province will be much easier to keep happy. Another province, their central building might be related to producing food, to add to your empire-wide food count, so a very important bread basket province, you know, that sort of thing. It's much more interesting. In other ways, though, the province capital is still pretty traditional. They still get walls, they still get a decent-sized garrison, and as you upgrade the main building, slots open up for you to actually build more stuff inside your provincial capital. However, here's another interesting one. Population points have gone. They've been in Total War for a while. I think they were introduced by Was it Rome 2 that first had the population point system? Where basically, yeah, the more buildings you had dedicated to growth, the faster you gained population points, and then population points could be swapped out for growing a particular building, whether you wanted to invest those in growing your capital or growing the sub-regions. I'm pretty sure they were in Rome 2, Attila, and both of the Warhammers. They're gone now. Now, instead, if you want to upgrade your central building, it just takes money and time. So there's nothing to stop you investing your money in kind of basically taking up to high tiers of settlement really, really bloody fast. But to stop you just doing that everywhere, it's really bloody expensive and it's quite slow now. Like, I think I moved territory up from like level 2 to level 3 and it took like, I think 6 to 8 turns or something like that. So upgrading central building is slow, but now you can basically do it whenever you can afford to do it, which opens up some new kind of freedom and flexibility. One thing I did notice, however, is when I did actually grow a settlement and open up a new building slot, at the very beginning of the game, there's not a great selection of buildings you can actually produce, which leads nicely into the new technology system, which is now really, really bloody important. So initially it kind of looks really, really familiar, and at first glance I didn't realise there was anything particularly special about it, which is basically it's got 2 branches, one military branch, one civic branch. That's been in Total War forever, very familiar from Rome 2, Shogun 2, Attila. But after a bit more digging, there's a huge change on the military side, and this one is a really massive game changer. The units you can produce are no longer tied to the buildings that you have got built in your settlements. The units you can produce are now technology you unlock. Once you have unlocked a unit in the technology tree, any general standing inside any friendly province can recruit that unit. You do not need to go on to build, like, you know, a barracks or an archer range or anything. Once the technology's there, you can recruit that unit, which is pretty damn big. Also, when you unlock some units, they basically replace and phase out older units. So, like, you know, you start off the game with some basic spearmen, unlock technology to unlock better spearmen, and thereafter that replaces the original basic spearmen. So kind of, you know, some older units get phased out over time. Now, there's a bit more fun stuff related to recruitment, but I'll get into that when I'm discussing war a little bit later in this video. Instead, I just want to focus on the technology for another moment, which is kind of decisions you make in the campaign, military decisions you made, and technology are all now basically in a great big circle and interlinking to each other a lot more closer than they really ever have before in a Total War game. So to give you an example, to unlock a new type of spearman, you can't just basically start researching that technology. All technology has prerequisites, which you have to basically get to by making decisions on the campaign map in terms of what you're building and what troops you're training. So to unlock a new set of advanced spearmen, instead the prerequisite is you need to have actually trained and have on the field 10 spearman units simultaneously. And I like that. It's kind of very elegant. It makes a lot of sense. Of course, you can't just basically rush up to an advanced group of spearmen if you never actually use the initial spearman. There's a bunch of other prerequisites too. Rather than actually talking through those, I'll just have these on screen right now because I do actually have a little kind of sneak preview as to what some of the prerequisites are. So that's what you're seeing in the background at this exact moment in time. But while we're talking about the campaign for a second, let's just talk about the other kind of key mechanics that are going to be central for Thrones of Britannia. So food. Food is back from Rome to Attila and works pretty much the same way. You have a food count, and basically every time you like train a new big army, you're going to need more food. Every time you upgrade your big buildings, you're going to need more food to support that as well. Supplies. Supplies is a fun little new thing. So basically the moment your armies leave your territory and start going on a nice little wander to go and find some enemies to beat up, they have a little supply bar that starts ticking down each turn. And as the campaign goes on, the bar drains more and more, and the moment it hits 0, your army starts suffering attrition. There are, of course, ways to slow down the decline and give yourself more supplies. There's things you can do to upgrade your general, and you can go into the raiding stance to slow down its decline as well. Oh yes, while I'm actually mentioning stances, yes, stances. Stances are back, but I think many people will be thrilled to hear they've been kind of slimmed down a little bit, and of particular note, the march stance is gone, which I'm thrilled about because many people probably still wake up screaming from a nightmare where a bloody enemy army just wouldn't come out of march stance and could never ever ever be bloody pinned down because they just kept running away in march stance. So thankfully, the march stance is gone. There seem to be basically only 3 stances right now, or rather, I was playing as a Celtic faction, they had only 3 stances. I can't guarantee that's true for anyone else. Potentially kind of other cultures might have more stances. but the Celtic faction I was playing as only had the default stance, the raiding stance, and the encamp stance. I think it was called Fortify, actually, but basically doing the same thing as they've done in Total War recently. Raiding basically just lets you do damage to the territory that you're in, as well as gaining a bit of supplies back as well. I don't think you can actually regain supplies. I think it just slows down the rate at which your supplies run out. Fortify, meanwhile, is one I didn't really have as much time to dig into as I'd like. I know that lets you replenish a bit faster, and I know that it lets you be immune to terrain attrition, so I assume an example of that is if you get caught out on the open field during the winter turns, when normally you would suffer attrition, kind of like in Shogun 2, being in a fortified encampment will actually help out with that. Now, the description does say establishes a fortified encampment. I don't know whether that's the equivalent of building a fort back in the old Total War days, where technically you've thrown up a small little kind of walled settlement on the move. Whether that's true or not, I was not able to verify. It does, however, also allow you to recruit, but only in friendly territory. As hopefully you can see in the footage I've put on screen right now, even if you're fortified, you can't recruit in enemy territory. So global recruitment is basically gone. And I assume that means actually, yeah, if you're in friendly territory, if you want to recruit, you need to actually be inside a city, unless you're fortified, in which case you can do it anywhere. And finally, there's a rather cool little war fervor system, which kind of works like war weariness, except it's more like a war Goldilocks system, where basically if you fight too many wars, then people aren't happy with you. And if you fight not enough wars, people also aren't happy with you. So you need to go to war the exact right amount, otherwise people get fussy. Anyway, as it's a Total War game, let's move on to the actual war bit of Total War, because that's probably a bit you're also interested in. So one thing I know a lot of Attila players will probably be thrilled to hear, the family tree is back. You have yourself a family tree, so you've got a proper little, like, line and dynasty and whatever. And leaders are now very, very important indeed. You may recall in Warhammer and Warhammer 2, you would embed an agent into an army, and then if you gave that agent certain upgrades, it provided some really big, powerful bonuses to that army. And some of them were ridiculous. Like, for example, the Warlock Engineer in the Skaven is just ludicrous. The amount of incredible bonuses that he passes on to his army is ridiculous. That's now basically been moved over to the generals themselves. So the generals can now pass on some truly ridiculous bonuses to their armies, which is really, really damn cool. And your generals are going to be around for a very long time, because the game's set over a relatively short time period. So basically, it's 4 turns per year. Each turn represents a season. So your generals aren't going to be dying of old age in a hurry. If you take care of your generals, they're going to be with you for many, many, many turns. Bit of a change from Warhammer, and indeed some of the recent historical Total Wars as well. Everybody is now 100% mortal. There are no characters of such historical significance that if they get killed on the battlefield, the game just politely says, oh, he got wounded, but don't worry, he'll be back in 4 turns. No. Everyone is mortal. Even characters of huge historical significance can totally 100% die. Creative Assembly did confirm that to me. Oh, remember how I said a second ago that certain upgrades that you used to get from basically upgrading agents and embedding them in armies have now gone, and instead that's been moved over to the general? And that's not the only thing that's gone. Agents have gone! Agents do not exist in this game. I double-checked this with Creative Assembly. Agents do not exist in the game at all. Instead, all the big upgrades that you got from embedding agents have just moved over to the generals, and the agents themselves are not present. Spies and assassins being gone is interesting, however, because as far as I can tell, there's not really an obvious way that we're going to be replacing having good visibility deep in enemy territory, and I do not know if there's going to be any form of assassination in the game whatsoever. I couldn't see any upgrade attached to the generals that would allow you to do anything like that, so it's possible assassination is simply not in Thrones of Britannia. And while we're talking about the very powerful upgrades the generals have, yeah, the new retinue system is kind of interesting, which is retinues are not just now kind of randomly assigned based on probabilities when generals do certain things. Traits still seem to be added a bit like that, but the retinue is now a little bit different, which is every time your general levels up, rather than having his own skill tree, instead he levels up his retinue. Now those guys can keep being leveled up, and they get really, really stupidly powerful. The short version is, champions make your general's bodyguards better, bards are good for public happiness, scribes are good for generating money, and I think the little kind of symbol there represents research. Foragers are good at generating food and replenishment. Remember that, it's going to become very important in a moment when I talk about the other real new interesting tweak with recruitment. Pillagers are good for if you're in the raiding stance. Quartermasters are the really interesting one to my mind, because Quartermasters increase your movement range, and as you level them up, also make your army upkeep go down. So a maxed out level Quartermaster basically makes an army really, really cheap to maintain, and also lets it march really, really far, which strikes me as very, very powerful indeed. Priest is good for keeping your generals loyal, and Siege Engineer, would you believe, are useful in the event of sieges. Your generals have also got some basic stats that probably do broadly what you're expecting. Command makes them better at battles, increasing the size of the general's bodyguard and also their morale. Governance makes them better at actually governing cities, ultimately leading up to, if you're capable of maxing it out, 30% decrease in any construction costs. And as I was saying earlier, now that everything's purchased with money and population points have completely gone, some of the buildings for big settlement upgrades are really expensive. So that 30% is going to be a big amount of money saved, as well as completely eliminating corruption. I don't know how bad corruption gets in this game. I only played the very opening of the game, so I can't verify how bad that gets in a big empire, but I imagine it's going to be useful. And Zeal's a bit more of an all-rounder. It makes your commander aura on the battlefield bigger, gets public order up, your morale under siege goes up in general, and your morale for troops that are close by to your general goes up in any situation too. So Zeal's a good all-round thing. So as we've just been talking about generals, let's move on to warfare in general, and in particular recruitment, because recruitment has got what I think is probably one of the biggest, most interesting changes there's been in Total War for quite a while. So I mentioned earlier, now once you've actually researched a particular type of troop in the technology tree, you can basically recruit it anywhere in friendly territory, in any town, or if you're fortified, anywhere full stop, as long as you're in a friendly place. Well, you probably thought that sounds a little bit ridiculously powerful. Yeah, there's two little tweaks to that. The first is the very medieval 2 Total War-ish unit pool system that you need to get used to. So for example, if you've just unlocked a new set of archers, you might only be able to recruit 2 immediately, and then you're going to need to wait for the pool to replenish over time. I spoke to Creative Assembly about this today. They confirmed to me that as your empire grows, the amount of units of each type that exist in the pool and how fast they replenish will also go up over time. So at the beginning of the game, you're forced to field very diverse armies, which is a nice way to kind of encourage you to learn how every single individual unit works and kind of give all of them a chance. Whereas in the late game, once you've figured out what you like, it'll be much easier for you to build specialized armies of the troops you particularly like, if that's what you want to do. But here's the real kicker. This one I absolutely love. When you recruit a new unit, it does not start at full strength. It starts at a fraction of its full strength. It looks like about 20 or 25% thereabout. So it starts very, very badly damaged. It is not ready to go immediately. Instead, you need to heal it up by letting it replenish over time. Now this, to my mind, solves a big issue in Warhammer 2, which is in Warhammer 2, if you lost an entire army, you were completely wiped out, basically didn't matter. Because it was not unusual for you to have a city where you could have like 5 or 6 local recruitment slots, so you could just train 5 or 6 units simultaneously, and then you could also use global recruitment to be training like another 4 units at the same time, and then a different general to a different town down the road could be doing exactly the same thing. They could also train 5 or 6 units, so basically inside like 2 turns you could have most of a full stack army back at full strength. So losing an army basically didn't matter. It was too easy to just train a new one once you'd invested the bare minimum into your military. But that's now gone thanks to the new system whereby new units actually start off very weak and then have to heal up over time to kind of represent the fact they're being levied and kind of slowly arrive over time, I suppose is what it's trying to represent there. Now this of course makes replenishment ludicrously important, and would you believe one of the new general's retinue does that? The Forager increases the rate of replenishment together with upgrades you can have around your empire to speed up replenishment too. So speeding up replenishment in order to recruit efficiently is ludicrously important. So yeah, that's a really cool little nice system. It kind of means losing an army really has weight, because it might be quite some time to get a new one. Because replenishment also by default feels quite slow. If you've been playing a bit of Warhammer or Warhammer 2 in particular, you might be thinking, oh, well, that doesn't really matter so much. Like, you know, I can take a unit that's basically dead in Warhammer 2, plonk it in a city, and like within 3 turns it'll be back up to full strength. No. Replenishment feels quite slow in this game, a bit more like the earlier historical Total Wars, back when replenishment was first introduced, back when that was quite a slow system. So yeah, if you lose an army, having to actually let it heal up or having to train a new army is a slow process that actually takes time. So you've got to be careful with those armies. And also, just like with the unguarded subregions, that's also a problem that's going to affect the enemy. If you smash the enemy's big army, they can't just basically magic another full stack out of nowhere. I'm sure the AI will be cheating and getting bonus money regardless on the high difficulties, but even if they're trying to train up a new army, when it first appears, it's still going to start off weak, so as a result, the enemy can't just keep spamming full stacks at you using magic, which is quite a nice system. So yeah, I really like that change. That's going to be a fascinating new way of doing things. While we're on the topic of war, here's one I think a few people who played Warhammer 2 might approve of. A large number of units have actually regained abilities that you manually trigger, which wasn't really a thing in Warhammer 2. In Warhammer 2, everyone just kind of took care of things by themselves. Very few units actually had, like, formations or things like that. So a large part of that's come back in. So, for example, I had it confirmed by the devs that all cavalry are able to dismount and then remount if that's what you want to do, and infantry have abilities and formations you can choose to toggle on or off. So I saw a large number of infantry that had, it wasn't a testudo, but I can't remember what it was actually called, so I'm just going to say it's a testudo. Look, they formed a little shield thingy that made them resistant to indirect fire, alright? So I'm just going to say it was basically an Irish testudo. They formed an Irish testudo and everything was fine. Also, one other thing I really noticed when I was just playing a couple of practice battles, generals are super squishy these days. They start off incredibly vulnerable. Like, if you've played mainly the older Total Wars, you're probably familiar with just the idea that a general can pretty much mop up early game stuff by himself. He can pretty much just wander into anything and cut his way and smash his way through your lot. Like, especially in, say, Rome and Medieval 2, General's bodyguards were super hardcore elite units. Not really so in Thrones of Britannia. At the beginning of the game, a basic fresh new general is super squishy and vulnerable and will be torn apart very, very quickly. You've got to be careful with him, which is why I like the new system of command stars and retinue, because yeah, if you actually get your general to be 10 out of 10 on command, then he's got double the number of bodyguards and they've got like plus 10 morale each. Meanwhile, if you keep upgrading the champion in your retinue, your actual bodyguard gets more and more powerful, so you can turn the general's bodyguard into a ludicrously elite fighting force. But yeah, if you just send a basically untrained new bodyguard into battle, I found that they got cut down when they got stuck into a protracted melee really, really damn fast. So you've got to be careful with them at first. If you want your general to have super awesome badass bodyguards that can slam into whatever you want and actually take part in the battle and kill everything, you're going to actually have to invest in it. Quickly moving on to the sieges, I think some fans of Attila are going to like the way it's actually gone. So in Warhammer and Warhammer 2, there was the slightly controversial system where basically you were assaulting a single wall. Sometimes it stuck out a bit and sometimes it came in a bit, but mostly you were approaching the town always from one predetermined angle and moving up onto a single wall to get onto a single plaza beyond it. That has gone. They're back to being full, proper, big towns which you can actually choose to approach wherever you want to. If you want to kind of, split up your forces and send a small force over in one direction and a different force over in a different direction, you can absolutely do that, which is marvellous. So we're back up to full towns. And also, like Attila, control points are back. Control points are back that provide a big kind of cross-battlefield morale bonus if you're able to take them. So, for example, in a little village I was taking, there was a little kind of marketplace, which I took over, that provided a big morale bonus to my troops elsewhere on the battlefield, which was really, really damn cool. Oh, and also, the towers are back and they're brutal. They're very long range, they're very powerful, and if you want to basically go and take them over yourself to stop them shooting at you, it's gonna take a while to do, which feels very artillery. But here's one of the most exciting things. The battle maps all feel really bloody unique, and Creative Assembly called that out to me. Like, they really want, like, every single province capital to feel really different. So I basically went into two territories that in a different Total War game would have been pretty much identical, because I think they were, like, the same tier and had the same defences, and they were the same culturally. But the battle maps looked really, really different. So I took one province capital that was actually a coastal town. It was against the sea. And as a result, I basically had a semicircle of walls, but then there was a big body of water. I asked the devs if in theory I actually had boats nearby, whether I'd be allowed to actually stage a naval invasion into the town, and they said I could, which sounds amazing. So that was really, really damn cool. So there's going to be loads of unique battle maps for each of the provinces, and that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to in Thrones of Britannia now, that every province is going to be unique. The battle maps are going to be unique, the function of each province is going to be unique, because the central building that defines what the town is going to be unique. It just sounds like it's going to be a fascinating game. I'm loving the way it's shaping up. Also on the topic of war, naval combat is present, but the exact form it's going to take is a little bit mysterious for now, because the devs basically said to me that this wasn't really an era of history where there's going to be big, exciting, sexy warships. Instead, ships are mostly going to just be transports. So while there is actually going to be battles between fleets, if you want to make that happen, they confirmed it wasn't just going to be auto-resolved. It's basically going to be a clash of units being transported. What that's going to look like on the battle map, I don't know, because I wasn't able to actually see that, so I'm very interested in how that's going to go. And most importantly of all, war dogs are back. You can train war dogs again. Huzzah for the return of the war dogs. And finally, victory, because this is shaping up to be a bit interesting as well. Because, yeah, Creative Assembly have been playing with victory conditions recently, and largely moving away from the idea of you must take 45 settlements, including this settlement, in order to win the long campaign. They've been trying some fun, interesting, different sort of stuff out. So, for example, there was the Vortex campaign in Warhammer 2, and it feels like they're doing some really fun stuff in Thrones of Britannia as well. I don't know all the details, but I know that a couple of different victory kinds that do exist are going to be the Fame victory. It's a function of building your characters in a particular way, tech you've unlocked, decisions you've made, certain conquests that you've made. So I don't know exactly how that all fits together, but it seems like if you want to, you can actually get to a victory condition that isn't just I've murdered literally everyone. Instead, you can just win a great Fame victory by managing to raise up some glorious, famous heroes and focusing on technology and building your characters and towns in the correct way, which is fascinating. And another one, the Kingdom victory, which seems to be based around the idea of unification. So I was playing as like one of the small Irish factions, and the impression that I got, though I didn't get an absolute confirmation on this, was that one of the goals I can have is to basically create a united kingdom of Ireland, and if I can do that, then as a result that is a victory condition as well, which is very, very cool indeed. As for the end game, which I imagine you might be interested in, Creative Assembly were unfortunately tight-lipped on that. While they kind of hinted at a big challenge at the end of the game, they were not willing to give even the slightest hint what that might be. Kind of going in, I would have guessed it might be 1066, but unfortunately because of the timescale of the game, where it's 4 turns to a single year because it's a turn a season, the chance of it getting to 1066 when it starts in, like, I think it's 876 AD, the chance of it getting to 1066 is minimal, so it can't be that. So I'm not sure what it's going to be. Possibly people who know history better than me will be able to confirm in the comments, because unfortunately 9th and 10th century British history is not my forte. So, you know, probably someone's going to say, well, obviously it's going to be the Grand Icelandic invasion that occurred in 926 AD, duh. I don't know. Possibly. Probably not, though. Probably it's not the Icelandic invasion of 926 AD. Though if it does turn out to be the Icelandic invasion of 926 AD, remember that I was the person that said it first. Anyway, that's all I could figure out about this. Sorry I couldn't actually show you my own footage. Rest assured, as soon as I can get my hands on some review code of this, we will be diving straight into Thrones of Britannia, because I'm really excited for it. Like, see the direction it's going in right now? There's so many fascinating changes. It just looks brilliant. It looks absolutely flipping brilliant. So really looking forward to this one. Hopefully it turns out to be as good as it's looking so far. And yeah, absolutely we'll be seeing a series of this as soon as I can get my grubby little mitts on it. So hopefully that will be very, very soon indeed. But in the meantime, I've been John. This has been Many a True Nerd, and this has been my first impressions of Thrones of Britannia. Thank you very much, and goodbye. This guy's enjoying that. This guy's enjoying his elephant a bit too much. In Fair Verona, we set our scene. Oh my god, Becky, look at her butt. It is so big. They've managed to glitch inside one of the buildings. Elephants in the rear! And then in come the chariots!